Hey, and welcome back to another video. This is the 9th episode of the story where there are so many things that we as humans are unaware of, or lack an understanding. The bijou are one of those things. Follow the journey of Naruto Uzumaki as he befriends the yokai that was sealed inside of him and, she, helps him grow stronger. Please support by liking and subscribing. Let's start the show. There were many things that Naruto enjoyed. Simple pleasures that brought out the best in him. He liked sleeping in on those days he didn't have any training. He enjoyed a good fight and occasionally spilling the blood of his enemies. Teasing some of the people in his life was also a very pleasurable activity. In particular he loved teasing Anko, Ayam, Haku, and Tenten, all of whom never failed to amuse him with their reactions. Beyond that he enjoyed spending time with Akane. It didn't really matter what they were doing. They could be having the most hardcore sex anyone would ever experience, or something as simple as just snuggling together on a couch while watching TV. Whatever they were doing didn't matter. There was nothing that gave him greater pleasure than being with his mate. Which would explain his sense of absolute peace and contentment when the first thing he saw upon waking up was Akane's peacefully sleeping face. The two of them were both lying on their side this time. Akane was lying on her left and Naruto on his right, so they were facing each other. Their legs were tangled together and they were joined at the junction where their legs met. Naruto could feel his hardness stuck between his mate's wonderful thighs and rubbing very lightly along her outer labia. His left arm was wrapped firmly around her trim waist, and Akane had returned the favor by having her right arm moving under his own appendage and wrapping itself around his back. Her hand was lightly pressing against his lower back. As Naruto continued to admire his mate's sleeping form, he wondered what god he had pleased to bring such a beautiful and wonderful woman into his life. Akane was everything to him. It was she who had taken him in and taught him the ways of the shinobi. Akane who had taught him to read and write. Akane who had comforted him when he was sad, who had held him when he had cried, who had been there for him no matter what happened in his life. It was she who had turned him into the person he was today. Without her, he would be nothing. Naruto shuddered to think of how life would have been had she not come into it. He probably would have been some attention-starved idiot like his blood clone had been. Maybe even worse. Naruto's eyes raked over his sleeping mate's form. Akane's chest and the shoulder she was not sleeping on respectively expanded and rose in time with her breathing. His gaze found particular fascination with her chest, an obvious area of interest for any male. Her perfectly round and nicely sized breasts were being pushed together thanks to how she was sleeping, and because they had not covered themselves with a blanket he could see that her pink nipples were slightly hardened from the air hitting them. His lingering gaze traveled from her breasts to her face. Like always, Akane was a vision of perfection and loveliness. Her face that looked like it had been sculpted by the hands of 1,000 angels for over 1,000 years. In order to create something that could only be considered perfect was currently set into an expression of placid innocence, a look his mate hardly ever carried. She was anything but innocent after all, and they both knew it. Her ruby red eyes were currently closed, her eyelids covered by her thick eyelashes. Her perfect, crimson-colored cupid bow lips were partially opened as she continually breathed in and out. Those lips. They beckoned him in ways only another set of lips she possessed could do. It was a call he had never been one to ignore. Leaning in, Naruto pressed his lips against Akane's. The beautiful red head didn't wake, but she seemed to almost sense what he was doing because her mouth opened a little bit more and granted his tongue access to the inside of her mouth. A soft whimper escaped from Akane's lips as Naruto deepened the kiss. He could feel her beginning to stir and decided to give her a pleasurable wake-up. His hand traveled from its place around her waist, his fingers lightly trailing along her skin as he channeled chakra to his fingertips and applied the first stage of the Rasengan to a more practical use. The female he was pleasing began to shiver as his hand crawled along her skin, leaving goosebumps in its wake. He soon reached her breasts and began applying the same technique to his palm as he began to fondle her right breast. At the same time, Naruto began to grind his hardened shaft along her lips, using all of his hard-earned skill in the act of sexually pleasing his mate to work her folds apart and the hood of her clitoris up so he could stimulate her even more. Akane woke up with a sudden jolt and a loud, sensuous moan. It didn't take her much time to figure out what was happening and who the cause of all these pleasurable sensations were. Really, there was only one possible answer to both of those questions. Her eyes remained closed as the hand that was not buried under the pillow she and her life partner were sleeping on came up and gripped the back of Naruto's head in order to pull his mouth even closer to hers. Her fingers threaded themselves through his thick blonde spikes of hair and her longer-than-average nails lightly scraped against his scalp. Naruto groaned into her mouth as she began responding to him. Her tongue came out to play with his. They moved in an eternal dance that was even older than human existence. Eventually, Naruto got tired of simple kissing and grinding. Wanting more, and knowing from the love juices Akane was coating his shaft with that she did too, he rolled them over so that his mate was lying on her back and he was hovering over her. "How do you want it today?" his question was mumbled against her lips, which he refused to let go of. Not that Akane was going to complain. Gently, she responded before taking his lower lip in between her mouth and suckling on it. Her actions were rewarded with a pleased groan from Naruto before she let go of his lip and smiled. "Make love to me." Most of the time sex between Naruto and Akane was almost always very passionate and heated. Much like a battle, the two were always trying to outdo the other in how many orgasms they could bring the other before meeting their own completion. They would use every dirty trick they knew. Considering one of them had practically written the book of dirty sex and both of them were avid fans of the Ika Ika series, that was saying something. It would not be inaccurate to say that sex between the pair was often the raunchiest and wildest ride anyone would ever experience. Too bad the chances of anyone else ever experiencing it beside these two was practically zero, no matter how much teasing they did suggested the contrary. However, while raunchy and passionate sex was often the word of the day with these two, such was not always the case. Times like now, sex was not simply an act of pleasure between two extremely horny individuals, but an act of becoming one with the person they loved most. Moments like this were more about the emotional connection and the feeling of oneness they felt with each other than it was the pleasures of the flesh. Naruto moved within Akane with a gentleness that belied the speed of his thrusts. In return, the red-haired vixen underneath him had wrapped her legs around his waist, hooking them together at the heels and using her powerful legs to spur him on. Her hands roamed all over his back, her nails lightly scratching his against his skin, not enough to draw blood, but certainly enough to leave a mark. In between shared kisses, Akane moaned and whimpered as Naruto continued to pump inside of her. He moved so slowly she could feel everything. From the way his long, thick shaft caused her inner walls to expand in order to accommodate him, to the way the upper part of his cock rubbed along the small bump inside of her most sacred entrance that caused her entire body to shudder and jerk and spasm as waves of ecstasy coursed through her body. Everything from the tiniest of movements to Naruto's loving thrusts was felt by her currently hypersensitive nerves. Such was the power of the bond they shared. Mating bonds between demons were more than just a way to mark someone as a mate. It was an empathic connection that allowed two people, demons, to share thoughts and emotions with each other. A constant thrum in the back of the mind that would only go away with the death of one or the other. And for those rare few like Akane and Naruto, whose love for each other could not be measured by even the vastness of the heavens, it was a connection that transcended mere empathy and ascended into a literal physical bond between them. Everything Naruto felt Akane felt too, and everything Akane felt was likewise felt by Naruto. Every thrust of Naruto's hips created an increase in pleasure for Akane, who could feel Naruto's pleasure through her bond with him. Likewise, Naruto felt the pleasure Akane was feeling thereby, enhancing what he already felt. This in turn created a continual loop of mind-blowing orgasmic pleasure that only increased with every thrust, every kiss, and every touch made by either one of them. Akane. Naruto's voice was a rough growl in her ears. The way he spoke her name caused shivers to run down her spine that had nothing to do with fear. It also had nothing to do with the way he was nibbling on the sweat on her neck directly behind her ear. Nothing at all. She shivered as Naruto began nibbling his way down her neck. He knew all of the more sensitive spots she possessed and how to take advantage of those areas to make her body shudder in pre-orgasmic ecstasy, and he made sure to leave a nice red love bite on each one as his lips trailed down her fair skin. With how much biting and suckling he was doing, she was sure those marks wouldn't be disappearing for at least a few hours, insane regeneration factor or no. While Naruto's lips were tantalizing her in ways only her mate could do, his hands had wandered down to her hips. There he began to caress, squeeze and fondle that tight and firm derriere that only women with highly athletic bodies possessed. He was already using the first step to the Rasengan as he worked. Both of his hands were rotating chakra in them in several different ways, making Akane feel like her bum was getting massaged by 100 professional masseuses. Her moaning increased in volume as Naruto did this, and she only began to get louder as her mate's mouth found the spot on her collarbone and began to nibble and suck on it. He didn't stay there long, only long enough to leave a nice-sized hickey. Then he was moving again, his lips and tongue traveling across her flawless skin until they reached her bosom. Naruto started slowly, kissing the swell of her left breast, then moving across her chest in an ever-rising spiral until he reached her nipple. It was already hard from her arousal, and so Naruto didn't hesitate to suck it into his mouth, where he proceeded to swirl his tongue around it, then flick it back and forth. Oh gods! Oh gods! Oh gods! Akane's body jerked and spasmed as she was pleasured in 3 different places at once. His hot, pulsing shaft as it made slow, loving thrusts into her slick, tight passage. His hands as they messaged her derriere in ways that would make her the envy of women everywhere if they knew of his talent. His mouth as they claimed her breasts in ways that the author of Ika Ika would never in his wildest dreams think up. Each spot was an erogenous zone, and each one was being played upon by a master in the art of love-making. If Akane were a harp, then Naruto was the maestro that made her sing out in a beautiful symphony. On a side note, if Jiraiya knew of his godson's godlike skills in the art of making love, he would probably be hauling ass back to Konoha so he could get some research material. He would also be extremely jealous of Naruto's hard-earned talent. Her fingers threaded through and tightly gripped Naruto's hair simply so she would have something to hang on to as her body was rocked in almost painful orgasmic ecstasy. Acting on instinct, her body responded without her mind being in control, and she pulled Naruto's head down, almost as if it knew she wanted more and was trying to convey that desire to her blonde mate. Whether he understood the message or not didn't matter. Akane was now reaching her limit. Thanks to the slow pace they had set, the pair had been going at it for nearly 2 hours. One of the many benefits of having the stamina of a high-class demon. Their bodies were glistening with sweat from their exertions, and Akane was finally ready to finish. She could feel her body tightening. There was a knot just below her stomach, a slow building pressure like that of a dam that had been so filled up it was close to bursting. Naruto! She cried out. 3, I know, Naruto said, his mouth suddenly right next to her ear, whispering to her in that husky growl he always got when they were making love. She shivered in delight as his hot breath washed over her. Come for me, Akane. That did it. The pressure that had been building was so sudden it almost took her by surprise. She cried out loudly as her orgasm descended upon her with all the raging subtlety of a level 5 hurricane as it tore a small village off the coast to pieces. It almost felt the same too, only instead of destruction and pain all she felt was the intense pleasure that only her mate could give her. Her body jerked and spasmed as her orgasm reached its crescendo. Her head thrashed from side to side. Her fingers clenched Naruto's hair almost painfully as her nerves were overloaded with the kind of bliss very few people could ever hope to experience. Her pleasure was only prolonged by Naruto's release. He pumped his load inside of her, and she could feel her body becoming full, complete. His white-hot seed only made her own release last that much longer. When the pair came down from their mutual orgasms, Naruto rolled over onto his side once more, taking Akane with him. He pulled her close and the two lovers shared in small kisses in between breaths as they began to reclaim their bearings. They probably would have done more, but at the moment they were having just catching their breath. Their last kiss lasted longer than the others, and when they separated Akane gave a sigh, the kind females only ever got after spending a wonderful morning, or night, of having their body worshipped the way Naruto had just done with her. She tucked her head under Naruto's chin, closing her eyes and enjoying the feel of her mate's strong arms wrapped lovingly around her body. They would stay that way for nearly 15 minutes before Akane finally decided to break the silence. "What are our plans for the day?" "Haku and Anko are coming over for breakfast," Naruto informed her. "I got permission to tell them our secret from the old man yesterday, and I think it would be better if we get this out of the way before our next mission." "That's right," Akane murmured a bit, her voice soft and content as her mate's body heat and scent lulled her into a sense of peace. "I had almost forgotten about that." She placed a soft kiss against Naruto's throat, smiling as she heard his purring hum of pleasure. "What time will they be over?" Naruto craned his head a bit to look at the clock, which read half an hour past 6. "They're supposed to be here around 7, so I'd say we have half an hour before they come." Akane sighed. "We'd better get ready then." Naruto groaned, not wanting to leave the comfort and sanctity of their bed. "The next time we do this it's going to be on a day when our schedule is clear," Naruto declared as he and Akane separated. The blonde let out a loud yawn, his large canines glinting in the light as he stretched his arms above his head and groaned in immense satisfaction as his back popped and cracked in a most satisfying manner. "Agreed," Akane muttered as she stared longingly at the place she had been laying. She tore her eyes away from the temptation, knowing that if she let herself stare at it long enough, the desire to simply grab Naruto and drag him back down onto the bed and cuddle up to him would overpower her. Instead, she turned, scooted towards the edge of the bed and climbed off, her bare feet hitting the thick carpet with a soft thud. Naruto brought his hands back down after his stretch, placing them both on either side of him so he could crawl to the edge of the bed when he stopped and stared. Akane was standing with her back turned to him. The backside of her body was on full display before him and, as always, he found himself entranced by how perfect she was. His eyes took in her flawless, silken skin, light and fair as if she had been touched by the sun just enough so that she was not ghostly pale. They traveled from her deceptively slender shoulders, down her muscled back and thin waist, over that deliciously tight ass that morphed into a pair of toned thighs and slender calves that despite their seemingly endless nature ended in a pair of small, dainty feet with crimson-red toenails. Everything about the woman before him, from her lustrous red hair to her cute little toes was absolutely perfect. He had seen her naked many times before. Hell, he saw her naked every day. And yet, no matter how many times he looked at her, Akane's form never ceased to inspire a sense of awe and wonder in him. "See something you like?" Naruto's eyes traveled away from rear end and back up her form to her head. She had turned her head so she could look at him out of the corner of her left eye, which he noted was saturated with teasing amusement. "What's wrong?" asked Akane, her tone still teasing and mischievous. "Has my beauty fried that brain of yours?" Naruto shook his head, a soft smile lighting his face. "No. Well, maybe a little." He winked at her, causing the red head to giggle. "I was actually just wondering what I did in my past life that made me so lucky as to be with someone like you." Naruto gave himself the mental equivalent to a pat on the back when he saw Akane's cheeks had become suffused with a light tint of pink. It was very hard to make the redhead blush. She was as shameless as they came. So he had to take pleasure in the few times he made it happen. Akane hurriedly turned away when she noticed Naruto's knowing smile. She cursed herself for allowing his sappy words to get to her. It bothered her that he could get such a rise out of her. Though she was not surprised. Much as she may try to deny it, she was a bit of a hopeless romantic when it came to Naruto. Kind words and loving gestures from him never failed to set her heart racing and her cheeks aflame. "Come on, Naruto," she began as she headed towards the shower/jacuzzi tub combination. She knew she had lost this round, so all that was left for her to do was change the subject before he said something that made her already hammering heart pump even more blood to her cheeks. "We need to wash up and eat breakfast before Haku and Enko come over." "Yes dear," Naruto said, and Akane could just hear the snicker in his voice. She made sure not to look at him, not wanting to give him the satisfaction of knowing how his words affected her. Too bad. Had she looked behind her she would have noticed Naruto rapidly approaching her as she walked. Alas, she did not, and thus, a second later she let out a surprised squeak as Naruto scooped her into his arms and began walking towards the shower. "Is there a reason you decided to carry me?" asked Akane, her cheeks still aflame as she stared into the amused eyes of her mate. "You mean aside from the fact that I love the feeling of you in my arms?" Akane's lips twitched into a smile as her arms wrapped around his neck and her head found itself resting on his shoulder. "Yes, aside from that. You were moving too slowly." She could almost hear the smirk in his voice. "We only have half an hour to get ready and have breakfast, remember? Then wouldn't carrying me be counterproductive?" "Maybe," Naruto admitted, looking a tad sheepish. Akane snickered at the expression on his face, causing the blonde Uzumaki to give her a playful scowl. Normally, a shower for them would take around 1 to 2 hours long. This, of course, was not because they were getting clean. As two beings who were not only incredibly randy but also unequivocally in love and mated to boot, the sight of their life partner was often more than enough to drive them into a state of near delirious passion. As such, the pair often spent nearly 80% of their time in the shower simply exploring and pleasing each other, and the other 20 actually getting clean. It was very unfortunate, and both of them lamented this fact greatly, that they did not have enough time to enjoy each other properly. Of course, they were completely neglecting the fact that they had just made love for 2 hours straight. Horny demonic entities indeed. While Naruto and Akane took 10 minutes to clean themselves of the sweat and smell of sex, a Naruto clone was created to make them a quick breakfast of bacon, eggs, toast, and orange juice with a side of fresh fruit. The Naruclone put the food and drinks on the table, grumbling a bit about lazy-ass originals before dispelling itself to let the pair know breakfast was ready. Less than 5 minutes later, the pair came ambling down the stairs and into the kitchen area of the apartment and sat down to eat. They had decided to dress in civvies today, with Naruto wearing a pair of carpenter jeans and a dark orange t-shirt, and Akane outfitted in a pair of tight black booty shorts and a skin-tight red sleeveless shirt that was stretched taut across her bust and showed just a hint of her firm abdominals. "You know, people are going to get killed with you wearing that." Akane looked up, amusement and mischievousness shining in her carmine orbs as she looked at her mate. "Thank you for the compliment," she purred as she leaned forward seductively so that he could see down her shirt. Naruto rolled his eyes, or he would have, if he were not so busy staring at her breasts. She wasn't wearing a bra. Go figure. Breakfast that morning was the same always. Filled with innuendo as one tried to outdo the other. Naruto would like to say he was getting better at this whole, see who can fluster the other faster thing, but he knew he had a long way to go. By the time Anko and Haku knocked on the door, Naruto's face was a mess of red and Akane was laughing uproariously at him. Scowling a bit at being beaten so easily, and disappointed since he had thought he was getting better after he had managed to gain an edge this morning, Naruto stood up and made his way over to the door. As expected, Anko and Haku were standing in front of his doorstep. Haku looked politely perplexed while Anko looked annoyed. Naruto was glad he and Akane had transformed into the child versions during their shower. It wouldn't do for the two to pass out from shock before they had even gotten a chance to speak with them. "All right, brat. You said there was something important you wanted to tell us. Well, spit it out. I haven't got all day. It may be free time for you kiddies, but I've got some poor fops to torture." Naruto's eye twitched. Then again, maybe not. Right, he plastered an utterly fake smile on his face to mask his annoyance and opened the door wider before stepping aside. Why don't you two come on in? This isn't something to speak about where others might hear us. Anko and Haku raised an eyebrow, but shrugged and went on inside. Naruto closed the door behind them. He wondered how they would take discovering his status as a half-demon who was mated to none other than the Kyuubi no Yoko, who just so happened to be their third teammate. He was about to find out. Story of the Ten-Tailed Wolf Training Ground 7. It looked like every other standard training ground that can be found in Konohagakure no Saido. Trim green grass covered the center of the training ground where 3 wooden training posts stood in the middle. The outlying edge of the training ground was filled with numerous trees and shrubs where stealth training was often taught, and on the outer edge towards the village proper was a fence that blocked off the training ground from civilians. There was only one difference between this training ground and every other training ground. Well, technically, there was 2, but we are only speaking of one at this moment. That difference was the stone tablet that stood next to the training posts. It was a very plain-looking tablet made of stone that stood at about waist height. There were no marking or adornments on it, nothing that would suggest it held any sort of significance. None except for the many names that were written on its gleaming surface. Standing before the stone was none other than Hatake Kakashi, the copycat ninja, man who mastered 1,000 jutsu, Sharingan Kakashi, and the many other nicknames he had been given throughout his life. Some might find it odd that he was standing here when he should have met up with his team a little over 2 hours ago, but those who knew him had grown used to his odd habit. It was something he had done for years now. Every day without fail the first thing he would do after getting up in the morning was come to this stone and stare at it for exactly 3 hours before meeting his team and coming up with some lame excuse for why he was late. And while getting lost on the road of life may indeed have a small part in why he was late, the black cat that so often crossed his path had absolutely nothing to do with his inexplicable tardiness. Nothing at all. I thought I might find you here. Kakashi turned his head towards the voice, acknowledging the person who walked up to his side. Naruto, he greeted cordially, albeit curiously. After all, this was not Naruto's normal training ground. His eyes, however, remained the same as he looked back towards the stone. I didn't expect to see you here. I came to pay my respects, Naruto answered. I've never actually been here before, and figured it was high time I visited it. Kakashi nodded his head. He didn't say anything. Whether Naruto was lying or not didn't really bother him. You come here every day, the silence was broken by, of course, Naruto. Day in and day out you never fail to come here and stare at this stone. Don't you think it's about time you forgive yourself? Now that got Kakashi's attention. The older man looked over at the young blonde standing next to him. Naruto was not looking at him, and instead was paying attention to the stone. Kakashi returned his gaze to where it had been. 3 specific names that were engraved upon the stone. What do you mean? I think you know what I mean, Naruto responded to his question dryly. No one else is blaming you for what happened in the past. And I'm sure my old man and your teammates have forgiven you, so it's about time you forgave yourself as well. Kakashi stiffened at the blonde's words. It was only for a second, and very subtle. Most people would have never noticed. Naruto did notice, of that Kakashi was sure. So you know who your dad is. And my mom. Then I guess you know who I am too. Hatake Kakashi, Naruto began to recite, graduated the academy at age 5, Chunin by 8, Jounin by 10, and Anbu by 12. You were on a team with Inuzuka Rin, and Uchiha Obito, who gave you that eye you're hiding behind your headband during a mission gone wrong. Your team was led by Namikaze Minato, my dad. During the Third Shinobi War you fought with distinction and became known as Sharingan Kakashi, or the Copycat Ninja. You've done your homework, Kakashi acknowledged. He had to give the boy props for knowing so much. Most genin never bother looking up information on their senseis. And no genin would bother looking up information on someone who wasn't their sensei. I'm impressed, and surprised. I had not realized you knew about your parents. Most people don't, Naruto said cheerfully, but they should have. After all, it would be nearly impossible for me not to know my parents when I looked exactly like my old man. The fact that I see his face nearly every morning when I wake up kind of makes it hard not to see the similarities. Kakashi withheld a chuckle. If only everybody else were so intelligent. Naruto shrugged. Well, I was under henge for much of my time at the academy, so I guess it's understandable, even if I didn't change much. I noticed that, Kakashi nodded. I had wondered why you looked so different from the last time I saw you. I guess I know now. Yep. So, Kakashi glanced at Naruto out of the corner of his eye. What was the real reason you came here? I doubt it was because you actually wanted to stand around staring at this stone all day. Can't get by you, can I? Naruto joked, before reaching into his pocket and pulling out a slip of folded paper. He handed it to Kakashi, who looked at it curiously, before turning an inquiring gaze on him. Naruto smiled. It's something my parents were hoping to do but were unable to accomplish because of the Kyuubi attack. I figured since they can't do it, I would in their honor. Kakashi frowned underneath his mask, curious. He deftly unfolded the sheet of paper to take a look at it. And stared. This is something to think about doing, Naruto said, grinning, if you want. The real files are with the old man Hokage, just go see him if you're serious about this. Anyways, the blonde Uzumaki stretched his hands above his head and let out a long yawn. I think I'll be heading out now. I've got a date with Akane, and I don't want to keep her waiting. Later, Kaka-sensei. Kakashi chuckled as Naruto spun around and walked off the field. He looked back at the slip of paper in his hand and smiled. Thank you, Naruto. Story of the Ten-Tailed Wolf. Naruto had to admit they made an interesting sight as they stood before the Hokage. A sexy jounin wearing an outfit whose only real covering was the large tan trench coat, an androgynous male who liked to wear female clothing, a super hot redhead wearing a skimpy outfit that only left things to the imagination because it covered the important bits, and a spiky-headed blonde wearing an outfit similar to his father only with different colors used in the clothing. They were truly an odd group. The four of them stood in front of the Hokage. He and Akane had large, shit-eating grins on their faces, both from the thought of getting their first mission with their new teammate, but mostly because of the sex they had less than 15 minutes ago. Haku was blushing up a storm, and would occasionally send glances their way, only to hastily look away when they caught him looking. On the other end of the spectrum, Enko looked not only incredibly embarrassed but also indubitably irritated. There was a large tick mark on her forehead, and her eye had gained an unhealthy twitching. Sarutobi Hiruzen looked at the group and sighed. Dare I ask what happened now? Naruto and Akane snickered while Haku's blush deepened, a feat not even Hinata had managed, and Enko's scowl grew. We forgot to put up our silencing seals, Akane admitted, though given the way she was grinning it was clear to everyone that she did not, in fact, forget to put them up. And I guess we just got a little too rambunctious in our activities today. Rambunctious, she says. Enko's voice was a low growl. She scowled at the pair, who adopted a look of such innocence it couldn't possibly be real. You woke me up in the middle of the fucking night with all that goddamn noise you were making. We're sorry, Enko-sensei, Naruto said mournfully. On his left, Akane nodded. Tell you what, the redhead started. Next time Naruto and I decide to fuck like rabbits in heat, we invite you to join us. That way you won't be so crabby about not getting some anymore. What was that? Enko shouted, turning to fully face the pair, one fist raised and shaking menacingly at them. Listen here, you little shits. I don't need either of you to have a good sex life. If I wanted, I could claim any male in Konoha. I just don't 'cause they're all a bunch of pansies. She paused. And for the last time, I'm not having sex with you too. Story of the Ten-Tailed Wolf. Zabuza had to admit that Konoha was a rather nice place. Boring as hell. But nice. It was a beautiful day. The sky was clear, there was a light breeze that caused the many hundreds of trees to gently sway, and the streets were busy as men and women shopped for their daily needs. Walking down one of the busiest business sections of Konoha, Zabuza looked around the area and lamented the fact that he could not carry his Kobikurabucho. He had been allowed to retain it, because the old man that led the village was just nice like that, but the condition had been that he could not carry it around until his probation period ended. It sucked, but he had no desire to get into a fight with the man who had been dubbed the professor in his youth. Insane and bloodthirsty Zabuza may be, but stupid he was not. While he was meandering down the road, a tall, scarecrowish figure holding an orange book to his face walked up to him and began walking alongside him. Kakashi, Zabuza grunted in greeting. Yo, Kakashi greeted, flipping another page in his book. How are you and your apprentice adjusting to Konoha? Well enough, I guess. Zabuza shook his head when he saw the man walk around a child that was about to run into him without even taking his off his book. Boring as hell though. This probation period thing sucks. Kakashi chuckled. Well, you only have 2 months and 3 weeks left to go. Zabuza's scowl said exactly what he thought of that. He opened his mouth to tell Kakashi exactly what he thought of spending all that time doing nothing, and for the last time I'm not having sex with you too. When the loud, piercing and angry scream of a very familiar woman rent the air. All around him people stopped what they were doing at the sound of the shout. Men blushed and happy smiles appeared on their faces while blood began dribbling out their nose at the thought of sex and what that shout meant. Women's faces grew red with anger and those who were walking with said men smacked their significant other on the head and told them they would be sleeping on the couch for having such lewd thoughts. This, of course, caused the men to hang their heads in dejection and curse whoever had just shouted. Which, by the way, earned them another smack on the head. Sounds like Naruto and Akane are riling up Anko again, Kakashi commented lightly before erupting into a perverted giggle. Zabuza rolled his eyes and continued walking. Looks like it. I wonder what they did this time. Story of the Ten-Tailed Wolf. Must you be so loud, Anko? Sarutobi sighed tiredly and began pinching the bridge of his nose to stem the coming headache. He just knew that somehow, someway, her screaming was going to cause enough problems that he would be stuck with more paperwork. He, Anko rubbed the back of her head as a sheepish grin crossed her face. Sorry about that, old man. Perhaps it was because they were the sanest of the group currently in the room, if one did not count the ANBU who could never be classified as sane anyways. Sarutobi and Haku both face-palmed at the same time. Of course, Haku did so because his face looked like someone had set off an Katan Jutsu on it. Sarutobi was just annoyed and resigned. Perhaps we should just get to the point of why we're here. Being the logical and sanest member of his squad, Haku decided to take charge since no one else seemed able to right now. He was still blushing madly though. Yes, perhaps that would be best. Sarutobi took his pipe out of the left bottom hand drawer. After packing it with tobacco, he lit the contents with a small Katan Jutsu and puffed on it contently. Recently, several ships have been attacked and sunk in a small port town in Omi no Kuni, land of sea. He began in a serious tone. Well, as serious a tone as someone puffing on a pipe can make. No one exactly who or what is attacking these ships, but reports from the few survivors claim it's some kind of sea monster. He looked at the group with an intense gaze, the lazily wafting streams of smoke from his tobacco pipe partially concealing the upper half of his face from them. Your mission is to head over to Omi no Kuni, discover who is attacking these ships, and put a stop to them. Sounds easy enough, Anko said. All right. We'll take the mission, old man. This should be fun. I completely agree, Naruto smiled as he saddled up to Anko's left. As do I. Akane moved to Anko's. She offered the suddenly on guard woman an innocent smile as she and Naruto grabbed her arms with their own. And just think. We'll be heading out to another country with no one from Konoha near us. Just the three of us, all alone. Haku's eyebrow twitched. Hello, I'm going too. He was, naturally, ignored. Just think of all the fun things we can do together. Naruto's smile turned positively feral as Enko began trying to shake her arms out of their grip to no effect. Demonic strength trumped Jounin strength any day of the week. What am I? Chopped liver? Haku tried again, and was suitably ignored. Yes, Akane purred in Enko's ear, causing the woman to shudder. Just think of all the fun activities we can do together, Enko-sensei. Enko's face turned red. Whether it was from embarrassment or anger was unknown. God damn it, you too. I don't you once I've told you 1,000 times. We are not having sex. I'm sure we'll wear you out eventually. As a red-faced Haku continued grumbling, Sarutobi pinched the bridge of his nose. He was really beginning to regret forming this team. Ugh, and they had looked so promising too. Where am I? Enko found herself standing on a pier looking out at a group of islands off in the distance. She had no clue how she got there, nor could she recall why she was even there in the first place. Despite this, those islands looked strangely familiar. Like she had seen them before. Where am I? As she continued to stare off at the distant islands, a stiff breeze blew across the pier, rustling the water and kicking up several leaves that had seemingly appeared at random. Enko was forced to shield her face, putting her arms over her eyes, lest some of the detritus get in her eyes. Despite how annoying it was to have random leaves and dirt flying in her face, she couldn't help but smile. She knew what that breeze meant. Turning her head, she faced her sensei with a bright smile. Her lips moved, though no words came out. Yet for some reason, even though there was no sound coming out of her mouth, she knew exactly what she had said. Strange. As she finished speaking to her sensei, the man's pale face smiled at her and Enko could not help but feel comforted by that smile. Her sensei really was the best. Story of the 10-tailed wolf pain. That was all she knew. It felt like every cell in her body was screaming at her, crying out as they suffered beyond anything she had ever felt before. No, beyond anything she could have even comprehended before. It penetrated her skin like a million needles covered in lightning chakra, it seeped in through her very pores, consuming her. Devouring her. All that existed for her was pain. It felt like her entire life had been consumed by pain. Even as the small shaft of light coming in through a gap in the door got smaller and smaller before finally clicking shut, all she could concentrate on was the incredible agony her body was suffering through. Not even the sound of the door locking was capable of penetrating the fog of her agonic-induced mind. Her body was covered in sweat, the chilly breeze that blew through a small gap in the rock walls served to present a startling contrast between the heat raging inside of her small body and the cool air outside. Rather than soothe her like it normally would have, it sent sharp spikes of torturous spasms through her body. It only added to the pain she was already in. Finally, her body couldn't stand it anymore. No longer capable of supporting her weight, her arms gave out and Enko crashed face first into the ground. Yet the pain on her face was nothing but a pinprick compared to the soul-rending torture the rest of her body was suffering through. Spasms continued to rock her body. In an effort to lessen the pain she was in, Enko jerked her body around to her side, curling up in a fetal position. The pain didn't like that. A sharp jolt had her body spasm again, forcing her to roll over as she cried out her agonizing torture to the world. Like a puppet being pulled by a set of strings and her pain acting as the puppeteer, her body jerked and spasmed until she found herself laying spread eagle on her back. The pain, that incredible, indescribable pain that made it feel like her soul was being torn apart at the seams all seemed to originate from one point. In the darkness that surrounded her, Enko's hands clutched the small 3-tomo seal on her neck, praying to every god she could think of to make the pain stop. Story of the 10-tailed wolf. Like a sailor who had just been pulled out of the ocean after almost drowning, Anko awoke with a startled gasp. Reacting on instinct to the adrenaline coursing through her like a hurricane, her body shot upwards from its laying position on her futon as she tried to remember where she was and why she was there. Or at least, she tried to. For some reason, she couldn't move. There were two heavy weights on either side of her body, pinning her to her futon. Unable to get out of her predicament for the moment, and her mind still hazy from her dream and the pain she was currently in, Anko decided to just lay there and take a moment to gain her bearings. The ceiling she was staring at was surprisingly light, made of a cloth fabric instead of plaster. That told her she wasn't in her apartment. A tent then. It was a good start, but she would need more information if she wanted to figure out exactly where she was. Now if she could just get up so she could take a look at her surroundings, maybe it would be possible to determine her current location. Please don't move around too much, Anko-sensei. I'm trying to sleep. Anko's eyes flew wide open at the sound of that voice. She was not surprised to hear the voice. She knew that voice as surely as her own. Knew who it belonged to. How could she not know that voice when it belonged to one of the people she had taken on as a student? No, her surprise came not in hearing the voice, but hearing it so close to her. If Anko didn't know any better, she would say the person that voice belonged to was laying right next to her. Which was preposterous, of course. She would have known if he had snuck into her futon in the middle of the night. Right? Warm breath hit her ear, the same ear that the voice was closest to. Almost mechanically, Anko turned her head, and was met with the shock blonde hair and blue eyes of Uzumaki Naruto. He was smiling at her. Good morning, sensei. Kaya. Story of the 10-tailed wolf. Hey, Anko-sensei. You're not still mad about waking up to find us in your bed, are you? Mao, don't mean Mistress Chan. We just wanted our cuddles with our favorite teacher in the whole wide world. Are you going to ignore us the rest of the way to Omi no Kuni? As he, Naruto, Akane and Anko hopped through the trees of Hai no Kuni, Haku could just barely contain his sigh. He had woken up this morning to the sound of a scream, which had turned out to be Anko-sensei shrieking like a little girl because Naruto and Akane had snuck into her bed last night, again, and since that small incident, things had been like this. Naruto and Akane doing their best to annoy Anko while their teacher ignored them to the best of her abilities. Judging from the vein popping out on her forehead, Anko was fighting a losing battle in that regard. Not that she could be blamed. Those two were damn annoying when they wanted to be, and they were much more stubborn than the snake mistress. Mu Anko-sensei / Mistress Chan. Oh, for the love of. Would you brats shut the fuck up? Finally unable to contain it anymore, Haku sighed. He was beginning to wonder whether or not joining this team was a good idea or a bad one. Oi. I'm not a brat, Akane pouted at being called a brat. She didn't look very angry though. I'm older than you. Wouldn't that make you the brat, Mistress Chan? Not when you're acting like this, Anko grit her teeth. Akane pouted some more while Naruto gave his mate and their sensei an amused smile. Not to interrupt you guys. Naruto, Akane and Anko all whirled on Haku. What / something up? But we're here, Haku finished lamely as he pointed behind them. The trio of immortal Kitsune, immortal Wolf Hanyo and mate to said Kishun, and sexy yet strangely easily flustered Jonin turned around to look at what Haku was pointing towards. They were standing on the edge of the cliff, the tree line they had been hoping ending just behind them. Down below the group could easily make out the port town that was their destination. The port town was an unusually shaped town. It wasn't very wide, but it was very long. Blocked off from expanding outward by the mountain range behind it and the sea before it, the town spanned the entire coast lengthwise. Because of the inlet to the sea they were situated in, the town was curved into the shape of a crescent. From their vantage point they couldn't pick out any specific details about the town. The roofs of the buildings were predominantly brown in color with a smattering of blues and reds. There were a few towers that stood over the heads of the rest of the buildings. Lighthouses most likely. From where he stood, Naruto could make out several ships sitting in the harbor. There were nowhere near as many as a port town like this should have had. Most likely all of the sailors had been driven away from this place despite it being a major stopping point for people traveling to other countries by the rumors of the Kaima, the monster that had been attacking vessels out at sea near here. The monster they had been tasked to take care of. Naruto took a deep breath, his face breaking out into a large smile as he caught the scent of the ocean on the wind. He had not had much time to enjoy that scent during their stint at Nami no Kuni because of Gato and the aftermath that came with breaking up his company. Now that they were here, the blonde Uzumaki had every intention of enjoying as much time by the ocean as he could before they had to take care of the Kaima. He spared a quick glance towards his mate, about to ask her whether or not she would want to go out on a boat with just the two of them after the mission was over, only to frown when he saw her eyes flicker. "Something wrong, Akane?" he asked. Akane turned her head towards him, blinked, and then smiled. "No," she shook her head. "Nothing's wrong. I don't think. I just thought I smelled something strange for a second." "I think the salt water is just getting to you," Naruto commented with a grin. He placed his hands behind his head, fingers locked together to support him as he leaned his head back while Akane huffed at him. "Not everyone enjoys the smell of the sea, salt for brains." "Ouch." Naruto mock winced. "Claws out today?" Akane gave him a fanged grin. "They're always out, honey. You just tend to like them so much you don't notice." Alright, Anko decided to break the two up before their banter took a turn for the sexual. Shiso did not need them trading innuendos back and forth right now. "Get a grip on your hormones you two. We've got a job to do so let's focus, alright?" "Well." Akane heaved a dramatic sigh. "I suppose we could do that." She grinned at the woman who currently looked older than her teenage form. "But only because we love you so much." "I'm so pleased to hear that," Anko rolled her eyes. "If this is the place where the Kaima's been attacking ships, then I guess those are the 4 islands that were talked about in the written report." Haku pointed a finger towards the ocean. There, sitting within the vast sea of blue, were 4 islands. The islands consisted of one large island known simply as Mother Island, and 3 smaller ones that had been given the names Jiro, Taro and Demon Island respectively. "I would imagine so," Naruto hummed before cracking a smile. "I'm going to go out on a limb and say the big one is Mother Island," he snorted. "How original. I think the one on the middle of the smaller trio is Demon Island though I can't be sure." "It is," Akane said almost absently, her gaze not on the islands but on Anko, who looked like she was one step away from having a seizure. "Then that would make the one on the left Taro Island and the one on the right Jiro Island," Haku said. "I wonder if those names hold some kind of historical significance." "Demon Island does," Akane informed them. The group minus Anko looked at her. "Long ago, about 300 years I think it was, there was a demon who had made his home there. For about 10 years he terrorized the port town, which was much smaller than it was now, and small settlements on the other islands, before being killed by the Sanbai." "Huh," Naruto frowned. "I did not know that. You learn something new every day. Are you alright, Anko?" At Akane's words, Naruto and Haku turned to look at Anko and became slightly concerned by what they saw. Mitarashi Anko was not looking very well. Her skin was pallid and her body was breaking out into a cold sweat. Anko's eyes were wide and terrified as she gazed out into the distance, like there was something she was looking at that only she could see. The most startling thing they noticed about Anko, however, was that she had a hand covering a very specific spot on her neck. "Your cursed seal is acting up, isn't it?" asked Naruto as he walked towards Anko. She did not answer, but then, she did not need to. It was obvious to him what was going on. There was only one thing that could cause such a reaction in a woman as tough as Anko. Forcibly removing her hand from her neck, Naruto gazed at the 3-tomoed curse mark. That had been given to the woman by Orochimaru. It was inflamed. Literally. The seal had gone from its normal black coloring to a flame orange color with flecks of red that made the seal look like it was made of fire. Naruto carefully placed a hand on the seal. Anko tensed underneath his touch, but he ignored her for the moment as he began channeling his Half-Yokai into the seal. The effects were almost immediate. Anko's body relaxed, her muscles untensed, she stopped sweating, and the look of horror that had been etched upon her face disappeared, replaced by relief. By the time Naruto removed his hand, the cursed seal had gone back to black. "Feel better?" asked Naruto as Anko gingerly rubbed the seal now that his hand was gone. "Yeah." Anko said absently. "Thanks." She gave him a funny look. "How did you do that?" "You forget, Anko-sensei, that I am a half-yokai, a Hanyu." Naruto chuckled at the confused expression on hers and Haku's faces. Though he and Akane had told them what they were and their story, the two did not know everything there was to know about yokai or even half-yokai. Hanyas are a very unusual breed of half-yokai, Naruto began to explain. Our energy is made up of half-yuki, a power similar to chakra that supernatural creatures use, and half-chakra, the human equivalent of yuki. Like all yokai, our yuki has regenerative properties to it, but because it is a combination of yokai and human energies, it is not deadly for humans unless channeled into them in large quantities. "Ha," Anko muttered as she rubbed her neck. "You learn something new every day, I guess." "That's what he said," Akane snickered. Naruto rolled his eyes. "Bad pun, Akane-kan. Really bad pun." Story of the Ten-Tailed Wolf. Alright brats, Anko started as she, Naruto, Haku and Akane found themselves wandering through the streets of the small port town in Omi no Kuni. This mission is extremely important, so you all need to pay attention to your surroundings while we're here. I don't want to run into any surprises. Like a giant tentacle monster made purely of water. Yes, Anko nodded. Wait, she blinked, then cast a strange look at Akane. What's this about tentacle monsters? We already know how important this mission is, Anko-sensei, Naruto said before Akane could respond with some kind of sexual innuendo that would cause their sensei to turn lobster red. As much as he enjoyed seeing how deep they could make their sensei blush, now was not the time. They would make their sexy Jonin teacher red in the face later. Like, after the mission later. Akane huffed, not at all pleased that she was being denied her fun. Thankfully, she did not seem inclined to push her luck with this, and decided not to tease the woman to death. Naruto used this small reprieve to look around the town. While it was a decently populated civilian center, there seemed to be an underlying current of tension and fear about the place that was setting him on edge. Only the adults in the village seemed to notice it though, the children he could see playing in the streets seemed ignorant. Were they afraid because of the kaima? Oh. Then why don't you enlighten us, oh knowledgeable one, Anko said sarcastically while dodging a group of children that ran past her. The group looked like they were playing ninja, one of them even had wooden shuriken in his hands that he was tossing at the others while they laughed and screamed. Tell me, why is this mission so important? Because Omi no Kuni has hired out samurai from Mizu no Kuni, land of water, Akane said before Naruto could. While her blonde mate glared at her with no real heat, Haku stiffened slightly at the mention of his old home. However, their last shipment was still destroyed by the kaima, thus, in order to maintain good relations with their neighbors, they've decided to hire out shinobi from Konoha to take care of the kaima before the next shipment arrives. I could have answered that, Naruto grumbled, causing Akane to giggle amusedly and pat his cheek in condescension like he was some kind of petulant child who just had his lollipop taken away. Of course you could have, dear. I could have, Naruto was insistent. There's just one thing I don't understand, Haku spoke up, making Anko and the two powerful supernatural entities he called teammates look at him. And what's that? Asked Anko. Why would Omi no Kuni hire out Konoha shinobi when Mizu no Kuni has its own shinobi village? Because Kirigakure doesn't have the necessary resources for such a small operation, Anko answered. As I understand it, our spies have reported that the Bloodline Civil War ended about 5 or so years ago. At the mention of the Bloodline Civil War, Naruto and Akane shared a secret smile that went unnoticed there, sensei. However, the amount of damage done not just to the infrastructure of their village, but also because of how many lives they lost, they simply can't afford to spare any of their forces for such a small paying mission. Most of the missions they take are higher paying so they can earn more income for their village to use in the rebuilding process. I see, Haku said, I guess that makes sense. Of course it makes sense, Enko spoke way too cheerfully for someone who just mentioned a bloody civil war that killed thousands of people. Now, come on. We've got to find ourselves a boat so we can head over to Mother Island. That's where most of the attacks are taking place. Shi and Haku continued on their way, weaving through the crowd. Naruto made to follow for a second, but stopped when he realized Akane wasn't with them. Turning around he saw his mate searching the area, a small frown on her face. Akane, Naruto moved back over to her, placing a hand on his shoulder when he reached her. You alright? No, Akane said, her eyes still roving the area. They eventually focused on Naruto. I sense something. Here. Something. Naruto blinked. Yes, Akane's voice was strangely grave as she spoke. He had never heard her sound like this before and, truth be told, it was kind of freaking him out. And then she said something that really freaked him out. Something not human. Not human. Then. You mean there's a demon here? Akane's eyes narrowed, her irises flickering around the town before looking out at the sea. Not here, she pointed over to the islands. Somewhere over there. On the islands? A nod was his answer. I can't get a good read on them, the red-haired demigoddess shook her head. With my powers weakened from losing my tails, my ability to sense demonic entities is gone. The only reason I can even tell there is a demon here is this, she tapped her nose and Naruto understood. The demon has been in this town recently. He sniffed the air, channeling his Halfiyuki into his nose. Now that you mention it, I do smell something other than salt water. It's blended into the ocean air so well that I missed it at first. It's a very weak scent, Akane said. I'm not surprised you didn't pick it up. The only reason I could was because I would recognize the scent of a demon anywhere. Do you think it's the Kaima? Possibly. Oi. The shout shook the two out of their conversation. Turning around to the source of the voice, they found an annoyed-looking Anko and a curious Haku staring at them. What are you two doing standing around like a bunch of vegetables? We've got to get that boat and head over to Mother Island. You two are going to have to go without us, I'm afraid, Akane said, and Anko stiffened at the tone in her voice. There is something here that Naruto and I need to take care of. Like? Asked Anko. When the two remained silent she sighed. Look, this mission is important, so unless I know why my two most powerful subordinates need to leave, she makes it sound like I'm weak, Haku sighed. I can't just let you go, she finished without missing a beat. You understand? Naruto and Akane looked at each other, a silent debate that only they could hear ensuing as they decided whether or not it would be prudent to tell her. Much debate and many strange faces made for what appeared to be no reason to those who did not have an empathic and telepathic connection by yokai mating ritual. Later, the two came to a decision. There's a demon in Umi no Kuni. Or a group of demons, Naruto added the even more unpleasant thought. Anko and Haku both stiffened. You mean like? Yes, Naruto nodded. I can't believe there's a real demon here. Haku breathed in shock, then noticed the look Akane was giving him and smiled somewhat sheepishly. Forgive me, I did not mean to exclude you. I just meant. I know what you meant, Akane waved off his concerns. While technically classified by humans as a demon, Akane was actually more of a spiritual entity than anything else. I suspect this demon is Merely an advance scout for a possible larger incursion. With the bijou sealed inside of containers and humans, it was bound to happen eventually. It was one of the problems most humans didn't understand, something they never really bothered to even try understanding. In their greed for more power, they sealed the 9 bijou away into containers and people in the hopes of harnessing that power for themselves. They never even realized that in doing so they were opening up a Pandora's box. Anko stared at her too, Genin, hard for a long moment. Their words just went to prove how different these two were from normal shinobi. They lived in a world that not even the Hokages would dare go near. Akane was duty-bound to look into this. As the only active bijou within the elemental nations, she was the only one who could deal with whatever demon had made it to their continent. And Naruto, as her mate, could not be persuaded to part from Akane and leave her to face this alone. Not when she was weakened from having given him all of her tales. "All right," she sighed at last. "I'll let you two head off to deal with this." A glare followed this announcement. "But I want you to make it quick. Deal with this threat and get back to us. Even if your demon is the Kaima we're searching for, we still have to prove that there is no longer any threat. Got it?" "Yes, Anko-sensei/Mistress Chan." Anko's eyes twitched. "Don't call me that." "Yes, Anko-sensei/Mistress Chan. I hate you both so much right now." Story of the 10-tailed wolf. "This is just great," Anko complained as she walked through the town, Haku following dutifully behind her. "Not only do I have to return to this kami-forsaken country, but now the 2 most powerful members of our squad are off on a demon hunt. This mission is going down the shitter really quickly." As he listened to his new sensei complain and grumble, Haku sighed. Sometimes he almost felt like a 3rd wheel. Or would that be a 4th wheel? Whatever the case was, he was beginning to think he had only been put on this squad for comedic relief, and so Naruto and Akane could partake in the Chunin exams that would likely be coming soon. That was kind of a depressing thought. "Here you go." Haku turned around when a small commotion caught his attention. It wasn't necessarily a commotion per se, but being a shinobi had given him an incredible sense of spatial awareness, and he could easily tell when something was out of place, so to speak. The thing that was out of place in this picture was several things that would appear innocuous at first, but when combined created a picture that was not at all pleasant. There was a girl standing in front of man. She was very young, probably no older than 12 or 13, and kind of cute, Haku noticed, despite the bandages covering her. Her hair was black and a little choppy looking, like she had tried to cut her own hair with a jagged kunai or something. She had eyes that were equally black, reminding Haku of bottomless pools. She was cute, but that wasn't what Haku noticed was wrong with this picture. His first clue that something was wrong was the amount of money the man had given her. It looked like the girl had been selling off high-quality fish, judging from what was in the basket she handed off to the man. That alone bothered him. Why would she be selling fish to people when her parents should be doing this kind of thing? None of the answers he came up with were pleasant. Another problem he noticed was the amount she had been paid. For fish of that quality it was a very measly amount. Nowhere near the total net worth of those fish. These 2 issues alone would have called for an intervention, but what really settled it for Haku was her eyes. They were just like his used to be before he found Zabuza, empty, soulless. They were the eyes of someone who had nothing to live for. Someone who had no purpose. "I'm sorry," was saying to the girl who looked rather downtrodden at the poor amount of money she had received, "but that's the best I can do." "Excuse me," Haku quickly walked up to the pair, who turned to look at him. While the older male simply appeared curious, the young girl looked at him with suspicion. Haku bowed before them. "I apologize for intruding, but I couldn't help but notice that the amount you were paying for those fish is nowhere near the markup prices they are actually worth." Haku took a closer look at those fish. "You see how fresh they are? Not only do they look like they were just caught, but the color here tells me these are a rare breed found only in certain coastal climates near coral reefs. Only a diver could have caught those fish." Standardly speaking, those fish are worth about 50 yen apiece, not 20. The older man looked very unsure of himself at seeing someone actually telling him he was not paying the girl enough money. He scratched the back of his head sheepishly. Look, it's not like I'm underpaying her because I want to or anything. It's just that with all this commotion going on because of the kaima, customers have been pretty scarce. Out of the corner of his eye, Haku saw the girl stiffen at the mention of the kaima. Sorry, the older man concluded, but that's the going price these days. I see, Haku frowned. After mulling over the problem for a moment, he pulled some extra yen out of his pocket, enough to cover the true price of the fish. In that case, I shall make up the difference myself. He grabbed the surprised girl's hand and placed the money in her palm. There you go. The girl looked at him in shock, her eyes wide and mouth open. Haku gave the girl a reassuring smile, hoping it would ease her troubled soul. Whether it did or not, he would not get the chance to find out. A few seconds after he handed her the money, the girl yanked her hand out of his grasp and took off running. He watched her go, noticing all the people who went out of their way to either pretend she didn't exist or glare at her, before she disappeared behind a building. Excuse me, Haku decided it was time for some information gathering since he had the perfect person to speak with right next to him. The older man looked at him curiously. I just wanted to know who that girl was. Her. The older man looked at the girls retreating back before focusing on Haku again. She's a diver. She lives in a small town over on Mother Island. An islander, huh? Haku's frown grew more prominent. If she lives over on the island, why is she coming to the mainland? The man sighed. Turning a bit, he set down the basket of fish in order to use his hands to make gestures to emphasize his point. It's because none of the other people living on the island will do business with her, he said, sticking a finger up in the air as if enunciating his words. Haku grew pensive as the man leaned in and cupped his hand to his mouth as if about to share some horrible secret. Not long ago, she was taken away by spirits. This time, Haku's eyes narrowed. He would admit to not knowing everything there is to know about the world, but he did have some knowledge of spirits thanks to Naruto and Akane. Spirits were beings who remained on this plane due to lingering regrets, and while some were malevolent and would try to harm people, they were also very easy to notice as they usually made an entire area feel uneasy. However, those types of spirits were very rare. The chances of one being here, especially with a demon present in the area, was practically zero. Still, while she might not have been taken by spirits, it's possible that she had been kidnapped by a shinobi, or maybe this demon had taken her and done something to her. Could those bandages be hiding the damage? He needed more information. Could you explain further, please?
Sure, the man crossed his arms over his chest and squinted thoughtfully. One day, a while ago, a bunch of people living on the island just up and vanished. The story is that out of all those people, only she turned up again. Haku nodded his head. He was beginning to get a better picture of the situation, but he needed more information before coming to any conclusions. We're a pretty small village, so she makes everyone a bit nervous. Haku closed his eyes as scenes of his own lonely childhood played out to him. So similar, yet so different. They say she lives outside the village now, alone. How sad. Yeah, it is pretty sad, the man agreed. Looking like that, covered in bandages and her being all on her own. But you've got to admit, it's pretty suspicious that she was the only one who returned. Haku's lips thinned a bit at the man's remark. It was so offhand most people would have disregarded it, but for someone who had lived a life like Haku had, it was way too close to the mark. I hope you wouldn't mind if I bother you with one more question, Haku bowed to the man. When the older male indicated he didn't mind, the ice user continued. You wouldn't happen to know where that girl lives, do you? Story of the 10-tailed wolf Enko cursed. Sometime during her walk through the town towards the dock in order to get a boat,
Haku had disappeared on her, and because she had not been paying attention she had no clue where to find him. She didn't even know when he had disappeared on her. It was this damn cursed seal. Ever since she had entered the stupid country it had been acting up, causing her pain and keeping her distracted. She could hardly focus on what she was doing, much less what the members of her squad were doing. This was why she didn't want to let Naruto and Akane to leave. Aside from the fact that they were the most powerful members of this team, which sucked for her to admit by the way because they were technically genin even if one was an all-powerful yokai and the other her Hanyu mate, Anko knew that even though they loved goofing off and hardly ever took anything seriously, she could count on them to support her when the time came. Now they were gone and she had no idea when they would be back. Not that she blamed them. If there really was a demon in this country then someone would need to check it out. It had been centuries since real demons had been in the elemental nations. The closest to demons living on this continent were yokai like the Bijou, and they tended to stay out of human affairs. At least until they had all been captured due to human greed. Demons on the other hand, did not, and they were real nasty pieces of work. That didn't really make her feel any better though. Even if she understood why they had to leave and investigate this possible demon appearance, she now only had Haku for backup, and as good as he was the young ice user was still only a Chunin level ninja. Speaking of. There you are, Icy. Anko shouted out as she saw Haku speaking with some man who looked to be selling fish. Just why he was speaking with the guy in the first place was beyond her. Not that she cared. She didn't. But it annoyed the crap out of her that she had been looking for Haku all this time and he had been talking to some fish seller. Anko-sensei, Haku bowed as the scowling woman walked up to him. I was just speaking with this good man here, he gestured towards the old fish seller, and I think I found a lead on our possible kaima. Really? Anko raised an eyebrow. She was only somewhat mollified by his words. Well, you can tell to me while we walk. I've got us a boat and I want to be out of this town and into the sea before nightfall. Story of the 10-tailed wolf, you know, Naruto said in a conversational tone as he and Akane walked through the dense foliage on the island where his mate believed the demonic presence was coming from. When you mentioned there was a demon living on one of the 4 islands, I thought it would have been on Demon Island, not Taro Island. Don't be ridiculous, Naruto, Akane scoffed at the idea of a demon living on Demon Island. Aside from the fact that it's far too cliché for a demon to live there, especially after it already housed a demon once centuries ago, most demons like making their homes where human settlements reside. I guess, but you would think that they would be a bit more discreet about eating humans, you know. Moving on to an island where humans live is like painting a bull's eye on your back. No one ever said demons were discreet, Akane told him with a Gallic shrug of her shoulders. She absently brushed aside a group of vines that were in her way while Naruto simply cleared the path around him with wind chakra. Most demons are fairly mindless. Only the higher demons and dire beasts like summons and the generals from hell are intelligent enough to act covertly. They're not like shinobi, where stealth and disinformation are the bread and butter of warfare. I suppose that makes sense. Naruto still didn't see it, but guessed it was just due to his ignorance on demon culture. Akane had only taught him about yokai, supernatural entities that humans often mistook for demons. He knew very little about actual demon kind, other than their lust for human flesh. Of course it makes sense, Akane chided lightly. It also confirms my hypothesis about what we learned from those fishermen. They told us that the small town on this island went out of contact exactly 2 days ago. No messages have come from the village and the few people who gathered enough courage to check the place out were never heard from again. There are very few reasons I can think of why this would be, and none of them are pleasant. Naruto grimaced. Do you really think? Yes, I do, Akane interrupted, her tone soft as she realized what Naruto was thinking. You're going to want to prepare yourself, love. If my suspicion is correct, then you may have a hard time dealing with what we find when we get to that village they told us was on the other side of the island. Story of the Ten-Tailed Wolf. Within a dark chamber whose only light was a set of candles that flickered and wavered as if they might go out at any second, 3 people stood within. Technically speaking, only one was actually standing, but let's not get into semantics. The point is, there were 3 people in this chamber. The first was a man who seemed to personify the term mad scientist. His entire body was covered by dark clothing with an off-white lab coat that reached down to his ankles thrown over it. He had scraggly-looking long gray hair that was tied into a messy ponytail behind his head. The hair framed a face with a squarish jaw, large nose, and beady black eyes that were currently looking at the ground with poorly concealed greed as he knelt upon the floor in deference. The other 2 figures were shrouded in darkness. They were beyond the light's loving embrace. The man kneeling on the floor could see nothing of the 2, save for their silhouettes and the yellow snake-like eyes of the one who was sitting on some kind of chair. This was the one that the scientist was showing deference to. "It's been far too long, Orochimaru-sama," the scientist stated. "Indeed it has," Orochimaru sounded amused. "It is most fortunate that I happened to drop by and found you still here." "I'm the lucky one," the scientist was ass-kissing. It was a basic tactic, groveling in the hopes it would get him what he wanted. This, more than anything else, amused Orochimaru. "For now I get to stand in your presence once again." Kukuku. Orochimaru chortled as he observed the man from within the shadow that masked his visage from the scientist. "And I assume the reason you remain here is because you are continuing our research?" "I am. I still believe it will someday be very useful to you, sir." "I certainly hope so." Orochimaru did not really have interest in the research here anymore. His only reason for being here was that a situation had arisen that required him coming here to clean house, so to speak. "Of course, I only remain here out of my loyalty to you," the scientist lied through his teeth. Orochimaru almost chortled. Really, did this man think someone of his caliber could not see through such a blatant and obvious lie? Oh well, not like it mattered now. This man was just a loose end that needed to be tied up. And what better way to do it than allow the Konoha ninja here to do it for him? But, maybe he should give the man a chance. If nothing else, it would amuse him to see who would come out on top in this battle. His cute little former apprentice and her squadron of brats, or this man and his scaly experiments. "You do know that there are Konoha shinobi investigating the Kaima rumor, yes?" He watched as the man stiffened. It was so easy. So easy to twist this man's emotions. "They arrived sometime today and are on their way to Mother Island." "I see," the scientist had not known that. "I suppose it would be prudent of me to activate the defensive measures then." "Yes," Orochimaru smiled, knowing that the scientist could not see him. "You do that, and as a show of good faith and appreciation for all your hard work, I will leave one of my most trusted subordinates in your care." The scientist's eyes flickered over to the shadowed figure standing at Orochimaru's side. Even though all that was visible was a silhouette, it was easy to tell from the dark outline that the person beside him was female. A very attractive one at that. Not that beauty ever meant anything to Orochimaru, but it did to her. And now for the games to begin. It would be interesting to see how the genin squad his former apprentice managed to become the squad leader of fared against one of his best shinobi. He had heard so many things about them. Kukukuku. Naruto looked around the village with a permanent grimace etched onto his face. What looked like it had once been a peaceful and quaint town located within the forests that surround Taro Island was now a ghost town. There was nothing. Nothing but the empty and burnt-down remains of buildings that looked like they had been in disuse for hundreds of years rather than just a few weeks. His mate was right. Know that they were here, he did not like what he saw. Everywhere he looked was a reminder of what had happened to the town. On his left was a building that looked like it had served as a small place for meats and produce. Now all that was left was a partially destroyed building, the left wall collapsed, the cloth that served to provide shade to shoppers torn and a number of large marks that looked like someone had taken some kind of bladed weapon and dragged it through the walls, ceiling and floor. The left provided much the same, only this building looked like it had once been a bookstore and someone had tossed a bundle of exploding notes inside and set them off. Much of the building is gone, scattered across the ground as whatever had exploded inside forced the rubble to burst outward in a circumference around the store. Naruto could see several chunks that had smashed through the walls of other buildings all around. As for the store itself, all that was left was a small, 1-foot-high wall that is black, cracked and charred by whatever had done the building in. No matter where they went, it was all the same, destroyed buildings, scorched earth, strange gouges in the ground and walls and not a single soul in sight. What made the whole scene even more disconcerting to him was the lack of blood. You think that if there had been a demon attack, there would be blood, right? Demons were a fairly savage breed, and they enjoyed violence and carnage. If nothing else, Naruto would have expected there to be several blood splatters all over the ground and walls. "Are you alright, love?" "I'm fine," Naruto gave Akane a wan smile. "Don't forget, I'm pretty used to seeing destruction on this scale. In fact, I think what we saw during the Kiri Civil War was much worse." "True," Akane conceded before offering him a compassionate glance. "But those deeds had been done by humans. This," she gestured to the area around them, "has not. You can tell by the distinct lack of blood. I would have thought there would be more blood than less." "You would think that, but that's because you don't know much about demons. I haven't told you a whole lot about them since I didn't think we would need to go into it so soon." She shrugged. "I guess a bit of a lesson on demonology is needed. Unlike yokai, which are supernatural beings that most humans liken to demons created by the gods, demons are creatures that are created from the negative aspects of humanity. The best way to describe them is that demons are formed from the negative aspects possessed by humans, such as wrath, greed, sloth, pride, lust, envy and gluttony, or negative emotions like anger, hate, fear and grief etc. When a spiritual being or entity that has died holds one or more of these aspects in vast quantities, they are reborn as a demon. Of course, this is how demons first came into being long ago. Thanks to us Bijou, a demon cannot be created like that in the elemental nations anymore, and we have sealed off the gates to the underworld so no demon can come in through that way." "So how can they get here?" asked Naruto, "and how are they created if they can't be created with negative emotions anymore?" "They can't be created via negative aspects or emotions here," Akane corrected. "Us Bijou have long since powered an international-sized sealing array that seals up the power the negative aspects of human emotion holds. It was created and embedded deep within the world's crust by the Uzumaki clan on the orders of Kami, which is actually how they ended up being gifted with that soul blade you wield." Naruto nodded to her additive about his clan. He was not surprised she had such knowledge on his clan. However, with all the Bijou now sealed, the seal will be weakening. "It still works for now," she reassured Naruto when she saw the look on his face, "but in a few years, anywhere from 5 to 10, the seal will no longer be able to keep demons from being created into this world." Akane paused, using the time to not only catch her breath from her explanation, but also search the area a bit more thoroughly. She carefully lifted up a high beam that had fallen into a doorway and kept her from entering the building she had been looking at, one of the few that was still intact. There was nothing there, so she put it back down and continued on her way. "As for how the demon got here, I only have theories. They could have come from across the seas, either by stowing away on a ship or swimming across. This doesn't look like it was done by any of the demons that specialize in water though, so I would suspect they had taken a ship. In which case, the demon is definitely one of a higher than normal intellect." "And the other possibility?" asked Naruto. "It could have been summoned," Akane told him bluntly. "There are a number or rituals that can be used to summon a demon. Most have been lost to the ages, but it is not out of the realm of possibility for one of those methods to be uncovered or even accidentally stumbled upon. The unfortunate thing about using seals to lock up the underworld where most demons reside is that there is always a key that can unlock the seal. Calloused fingers closed around the hilt of a sword. And how many keys are there? Too many to count, Akane answered as her nails lengthened into claws. Along with this small change her eyes grew slitted and whiskers appeared on her face. A single tail also slid out from the flap they had made in her shorts. Each bijou sealed the power several aspects held. I sealed the 7 most powerful aspects, those I mentioned before. I don't know how many or which aspects and emotions the other bijou sealed. We had determined that it would be best not to tell each other who sealed what. That way it would be impossible for someone looking to gain information on how to fully unlock the underworld from finding it out from one person. The atmosphere around them grew heavy, oppressive. A malicious presence filled the air, causing the hair on the back of Naruto's neck to stand on end. They were no longer alone. A soft click signified a sword being unhooked from its sheath but not drawn. Wouldn't that cause the seals to overlap if 2 bijou tried to seal the same aspect? No, Akane's eyes grew wary as she watched the ground light up in a red haze of energy. If a bijou tried to seal an already sealed a negative aspect of humanity, it just wouldn't work. There are hundreds if not thousands of negative aspects, so the likelihood of a bijou finding out all of the aspects that were sealed is impossible. And even if they did find out a certain aspect was already sealed, they wouldn't know who sealed it. I see. Something emerged from the ground around them. Circles. Red circles filled with thousands of intricate-looking lines, a sealing array of such complexity that Naruto could only decipher 1 or 2 lines within them before they dispersed. Several seconds later the feelings of malice and hate increased as several dozen figures emerged from the ground. I think there is more than just one demon here. No. There had only been one. Whatever demon originally came here is simply summoning these ones. Akane narrowed her eyes. We'll have to defeat them all if we wish to discover the one who did this. Forcing the boss to come out by destroying his pawns, I see, Naruto smiled grimly as he fully unsheathed his blade, the hissing sound of steel being drawn resounding through the destroyed town. I like that method. Why don't we get this party started? Story of the 10-tailed wolf. It wasn't long after finding Haku that she and the ice user found themselves on a small boat bound for Mother Island, the place where all of the disappearances were said to have happened. Of course, calling the dingy little vessel they were on a boat was something of an overstatement. It was really nothing more than a small skiff, a rowboat that didn't even have a motor to run it. Talk about underpowered. Why exactly am I the one who has to do all the rowing? Haku asked in complaint as they continued to travel further out to sea. He had been rowing this damn boat for nearly 20 minutes now while all Anko did was sit there. His arms were beginning to get tired. You are doing the rowing because I am your sensei and I said you're doing the rowing, Anko answered with a large smile. There was nothing like delegating tasks beneath your status as an elite shinobi to those lower than you, like your genin, for instance. I think you're just lazy. You say something. Nothing. Humph. I thought not. Now keep rowing. Yes, sensei. As he continued to row the small skiff, Haku's eyes were constantly surveying the area around them. It was difficult to see at this time of night, but he could still spot the silhouette of the 4 islands located off the coast of Omi no Kuni. Other than those large shadows though, there was nothing. Even the water was too dark to see down. Sensei, I can't tell how far we are to Mother Island. Anko snapped out of her thoughts, if she had any, and straightened up at the sound of Haku's voice. She looked out at the large, black shape of Mother Island and squinted as she tried to calculate the distance. I'd say we're about 10 kilometers out. If we keep at the pace we're going, we should be there a little before daybreak. Great, Haku sighed, it looks like I'm going a night without sleep. Hey, stop complaining, Anko chided. Considering you were on the run with Zabuza for so long, you should be used to this. Trailing off mid-sentence, Enko only had enough time to sense that something was wrong before several large, sharp-looking spikes made of what appeared to be some kind of tainted glass erupted from underneath her and Haku. Despite being caught off guard, the two shinobi were quick on the uptake and managed to leap out of the skiff as it was turned into small chunks of debris and wood chips. The two landed on the water some distance away, channeling chakra to the bottom of their feet to keep from sinking. "Sensei," Haku's voice was sharp as he entered the mindset of a shinobi that had been forced to analyze every situation quickly and precisely if they wanted to survive another day. "Those spikes look similar to my own Hayaton Jutsu. Whoever this person is may be a Kekkei Genkai user." Enko frowned, but agreed with the ice user as she looked at the spike jutting out from what had previously been a skiff. The crystal was large, almost 5 feet in diameter. Here it broke the water's surface before shrinking as it moved up. At the very end it split into 3 sharp points, which had been what skewered their boat. Considering it looked like a good deal of the jutsu was underwater, there was no telling just how large the spike actually was. "Huh. It looks like crystal. Pretty good guess for a couple of 2-bit leaf ninja," said 2-leaf ninja's eyes widened as they spun around to see the person who had snuck up on them so thoroughly that neither had even sensed her until she attacked. She was a fair-skinned woman with dark eyes and light blue hair that she kept tied behind her in a spiky ponytail. A few long strands were worked out and framed a face that would have been beautiful to behold were it not for the arrogant sneer on her ruby-red lips. Her clothing seemed to consist of a green dress with a long sleeve on the left and a short one on the right, a red turtleneck with a white, fluffy collar and brown gloves. Underneath her dress was a red one-piece suit and calf-length, brown sandal boots. "I'm surprised you actually managed to avoid my crystals," the woman began hand-sealing before she even finished speaking. "Let's see how you do when the crystals can actually follow you." Shotan, Kurasutaru Ibra no Saicho, Crystal Release, Growing Crystal Thorns. Story of the 10-tailed wolf. The demons that had been summoned were the ugly-looking things Naruto had ever seen. They were human enough, at least in shape, but that was where most of the similarities ended. Their skin was a mottled gray that looked like it was dead and flaking off, they had clawed hands and their eyes were all red with no iris, pupil or sclera. Akane said they were the first of the 7 hells of the demon army, Hell's Pride. They wore ragged, dark purplish-looking cloaks that had strange patterns sewn in on the hem around their hoods and wielded a large, nasty-looking crooked scythe with a spiked bottom that were apparently used for impaling downed enemies. Several flashes of light was all that could be seen of Naruto's blade as it cut through several of the demons that had been summoned to ambush them. There was a resounding click as a blade was sheathed. The demons surrounding the blonde-haired Hanyu soon fell apart, their bodies sliced to pieces by a countless number of cuts. Taking a slow breath as he finished off the last group of enemies that had surrounded him, Naruto turned his head to look at his mate and see how she was doing with her batch of grunts. Naturally, she was doing fine. Akane was moving through her enemies with the grace of a dancer and the viciousness of an animal. Her long, sharp claws tore through the decaying flesh of the Hell's Prides like a wind jutsu cuts through paper. Blood and gore splattered all around her as arms, legs and heads were sent sailing in all directions. Naruto found her viciousness when battling demons kind of hot. Several Hell's Prides even ended up being impaled or sliced apart by their own weapons when they actually managed to swing at her. Akane would either simply pry the weapon out of their hands, often taking the hand and most of the arm with her, and hack them apart. Or she would let them kill each other by redirecting their attacks into one of the many demons surrounding her or positioning herself so that one of them was behind her and dodging when the Hell's Pride in front of her made to attack. When the last of her enemies had been slain, the red-haired pseudo-goddess walked over to him. "Is that all of them?" "Looks like it." Akane looked around at all the demon corpses that littered the ground. Most had dissolved by now, leaving nothing more than ash, but a few still remained. "Now all we do is wait for the big bad to show up." They didn't have to wait long. A few seconds later a strange, bluish dust formed coalesced into existence several inches to Naruto's left. This is followed by a purple blade made of what looked like a strange, glowing metal trying to bisect him. It was dodged when he jumped backwards, but it still managed to slice off a small sliver of his clothing. A look at the spot where he had almost been cut in twine revealed what they would now be facing. It looked similar to those Hell's Pride things they had taken care of a while ago, with only a few differences. For one thing, it was much bigger, nearly 2/3 taller than Naruto. Its cloak was a dark black and wrapped around its form like a veil, the tattered ends fluttering in the breeze. Both its eyes and mouth were glowing a bright blue, as if some kind of abominable energy were powering it. Finally, there was the scythe. Naruto's first thoughts on it being made out of some kind of strange metal were correct. It was an unusual weapon whose blade was made from a glowing purple material that looked razor-sharp and possessed strange, organic-looking patterns on its surface. There were 4 spikes sticking out of it, one on the top, another on the opposite side that the main blade was on and the last one on the bottom. It definitely looked like a vicious weapon. A Hell Vanguard, Akane identified as the thing began teleporting around the clearing within that strange dark blue sand. I'm not surprised. They're usually the ones who control the 7 hells, though they too are often little more than grunts with more intelligence than low-level demons. Threat level? Not very high. You should be able to kill it easily. Just be careful of its ability to fly and teleport. Right. Naruto gripped the hilt of his blade with his fingers and took a wide stance that lowered his center of gravity. In that case, why don't you sit this one out while I deal with Ugly here? I plan to. Akane moved back so as to give her mate more room to maneuver. For good measure, she also brought up a red barrier that surrounded her and would keep something as weak as the Hell Vanguard from attacking her. This will be good experience for you to get your first true fight against a demon with. The Hell Vanguard soon began using that teleporting ability it possessed to randomly show up around the clearing. Sometimes it would move further away from Naruto, other times it moved closer. Yet it never attacked. Naruto was sure it was doing this to try and confuse him. Rather than let its constant popping up around the clearing bother him, the blonde Hanyu hunkered and played the waiting game. His breathing slowed, his eyes became lidded, and his sense of spatial awareness expanded and sharpened into a finely honed edge as he waited for his opening. It came soon enough. Just like he had suspected, the constant use of its ability to jump from one place to another was simply to confuse him before it moved in for the kill. A few dozen hops later the blue sand appeared right underneath him, and less than a second after that, the Hell Vanguard popped out from within its murky depths and tried to vivisect him. A short hop backwards allowed Naruto to avoid being injured. Pushing off the balls of his feet, he dashed forward. As he closed the distance with the Hell Vanguard, his blade flashed out of its sheath so quickly there wasn't even a hiss of steel. There was a brief flicker of light where the blade could be seen lashing out in a quick slice at the Vanguard. Such an attack would have normally cut whatever he was fighting in half. And it would have, had the Vanguard not used its ability to teleport to vanish within that dark blue sand before the blade could cut through it. TCH. Naruto jumped into the air and used his own yokai as a platform to push himself even higher. It was a good thing because he managed to avoid the demon bursting into reality behind him and carving his back up with that scythe. As he descended, Naruto's blade came down in a long stroke that was meant to split the Hell Vanguard down the middle. It didn't, and instead a loud clang of steel striking against steel was heard as the demon held its scythe in both hands and used the middle of the metal pole to block Hikijukami and save itself from a gruesome death. Undeterred by the failed attack, Naruto pushed off the pole and flipped through the air. He landed on the ground several feet from the creature, and then he vanished. Slicked. Click. The sound of metal cutting through flesh was incredibly loud in the small clearing of the deserted town. The Hell Vanguard stood still for but a moment before its legs buckled and fell. At the same time, the upper half of its body began to slide off its waist. Both halves hit the ground with a dull thud, revealing Naruto standing behind it, his blade already slid into its sheath. That wasn't bad, Akane congratulated her mate on his first kill of a middle-class demon. But you could have been faster. Had you used Shunshin during your first attack, you would have killed it. I wasn't prepared for how quickly it could teleport, Naruto shrugged. It caught me off guard. Well, now that you know, I expect you to not get caught off guard like that again, Akane told him. Such a low-level demon should not be even remotely capable of standing up to someone as strong and skilled as you for any longer than half a minute. That battle took a full 60 seconds. Oh. It looked like Akane was in sensei mode at the moment. He hadn't had to deal with that for a good while now. Still, he supposed the new situation they found themselves in necessitated her critiquing. He wondered how Anko and Haku were doing without them. Surely, their beautiful sensei missed getting bombarded with sexual innuendo. Yeah, right. Story of the 10-tailed wolf shit. Anko's curse rang out in the watery battlefield as she was forced to jump around to avoid the crystal thorns that kept growing off the strange plant-like pink crystal that the crazy bitch who had attacked them created. She swerved and ducked and dodged and jumped, doing everything humanly possible to avoid letting those sharp tips that formed at the end of each new outgrowth from impaling her. Haku was in the much same position. Thankfully for the younger and less experienced boy, the woman seemed to be focusing the majority of her efforts on Anko, allowing him some breathing room with which to move and make decisions. And he needed to make one fast. Those spikes were getting dangerously close to Anko and he had no clue how long she could keep going. And there was no log for her to substitute with. A dangerous position for any leaf ninja to find themselves. With his skills and observation, Haki was more than capable of noticing something that Anko would have likely missed even if she wasn't dodging crystallized spikes of doom. Not only had Guren not moved since she had unleashed her jutsu. Not only that, but it was clear she had to concentrate on making more hand seals in order to make that ice crystal of hers grow. The most reasonable assumption. If he is able to distract Guren, she wouldn't be able to make hand seals, and if she couldn't make hand seals then they would have a moment in time where they could close the distance and attack her. Making a snap decision, Haku began going through a set of hand seals before slamming his hands on the water's surface. Hayaton, Korashira, Ice Release, Ice Pillars. The water under his palms rippled. The ripples spread outwards. Without warning, more ripples appeared on the water's surface. That was the only warning Guren got before ice pillars erupted all around her. Cursing, she has forced chakra into her feet and pushing herself into the air. She had just managed to ascend past the ice pillars when she was met by Anko, who had used the opportunity Haku had given her to close the distance between the two of them. What followed that was a mid-air taijutsu battle. Fist and feet flew between the two fierce kunoichi at speeds that would look like nothing more than mere blurs to the average genin. A hand flew forward towards Guren's face at speeds that blurred at great speeds. It was deflected when an arm came up and slapped it away. That same arm was then thrust forward into a knife strike towards Anko's throat. It too was avoided when Anko moved her head back and her fist came out to catch the knifed hand. I recognize that fighting style, Guren smirked as she and Anko landed on the water's surface. Anko still had a strong hold of her fist. Their arms were both shaking as they tried to overpower the other. So, you're Orochimaru's little apprentice. Fucking bitch. Anko's knee shot out and tried to shove itself into her gut. It was blocked by Guren's own knee coming up. That sadistic son of a bitch isn't my sensei. And I'll kill him for betraying Konoha. Don't insult Orochimaru-sama because of your own weakness. Guren growled and pushed the other woman away. She soon began making more hand seals. The only reason he threw you away like trash was because you lacked the ambition, drive and talent necessary to be a part of his forces. Shoton, Kohari, Crystal Release, Crystal Needles. Several dozen long, sharp, pointed pink and white needles shot out from the water and blasted straight towards Anko, who had begun her own hand sealing after she had been pushed away. Katan, Gokyaku no Jutsu, Fire Release, Great Fireball Jutsu. Bringing a hand to her lips, she breathed out a large ball of fire that exploded against the ice crystals. Unfortunately for her, the ice crystals were much stronger than they looked. The fire was soon dispersed and they continued towards her unabated. Crap! Enko had barely even a second before she was beset upon by the crystal needles. Over a dozen bright pink and white crystals impaled her body. Blood began running down the crystals as the woman went limp. Gyurin smiled, but it only lasted until she heard a shout of, Hyuton, Ijurenku, Ice Release, Ice Lance. She was then forced to jump out of the way as a large lance made of ice nearly impaled her from behind. Humph, trying to take advantage of me while I'm distracted? Nice try, kid, but I'm not that easy. Haku just smiled pleasantly. Apparently, you are. What? Senai to Joshu, many hidden shadow snakes. Gyurin's eyes widened. She looked up just as a shadow fell across her field of vision and saw an uncountable number of snakes descending upon her. There were so many that they had managed to block out the now rising sun. Damn it! She moved, speeding backwards with rapid hops. The snakes hit the water she had been standing on, creating a loud crash and a giant wall of water to rise up. As water hit Gyurin's face in the form of a light mist, the snakes burst from the slowly sinking wall and chased after her like a pack of rabid animals. Did you forget already? I've been working with Orochimaru-sama for years. I know all the possible jutsu you can use against me and know how to counter them. Gyurin began going through several more hand seals. She would show this idiot how big of a mistake she made in using one of her old sensei's jutsu. Did you forget I'm not alone? Sensatsu Suho, 1,000 flying water needles. What? Gyurin's growled as the water around her rose up from the surface, hovered in midair, and proceeded to morph into the shape of a large number of water needles. Though the name suggested there were only 1,000, it looked like there were much more. Maybe even tens of thousands. There was enough of them that they formed an impenetrable barrier around her, blocking all possible routes of escape. All except one. As the needles of watery death flew towards her from all sides, Gyurin cut the flow of chakra to her feet and dropped into the water. The needles all exploded in a shower of liquid as they struck each other, sending sprays of water everywhere. When the water dispersed back into the ocean, there was no sign of Gyurin. Enko and Haku looked warily at the spot Gyurin had been. Both of them concluded that if her bloody corpse was not floating face down in the water, then she was obviously still alive. The two quickly put themselves on guard, each prepared for when the woman would undoubtedly have to rise again. Shotan, Hasho Koryu, Crystal Release, Tearing Crystal Falling Dragon. The attack they were looking for came soon enough. It wasn't very subtle. In fact, it would have been more subtle to bull rush them head on screaming, "Here I come," like some kind of idiot than what they were facing. What were they facing? A dragon. A big-ass, serpentine dragon that was nearly 60 meters in length, made of light pink crystallized water and two green diamond-shaped eyes. And standing atop of that dragon, holding onto the two large, pink crystal horns sticking out of its head was none other than a pissed-off-looking Gyurin. Well shit. Enko was very concise in her thoughts. That is one big dragon. Haku wasn't much better. The dragon bellowed out a loud roar cry, which was strange because it was made of crystal and not actually alive, but whatever, then it rushed forward, intent on crushing the two who had attacked the one that created it. Enko and Haku jumped away from each other. The dragon swerved and rushed after Enko, who Gyurin still deemed to be the greater threat. Or maybe she was just pissed by the things the woman said about Orochimaru. The only person who had the answer to such a question was none other than Gyurin herself. Having a giant, floating pink lizard chasing after you was not fun, as Enko could tell anyone who asked. The damn thing was tenacious. No matter what she did to try and avoid it, the thing kept on following her. Gyurin's taunts weren't helping much either. If anything, The woman's insulting words were even more distracting than the giant lizard. Really, if that bitch didn't have a giant-ass crystal dragon keeping one of her kunai from impaling the cunt's pretty little face. Hayaton, Kori Chikyu, Ice Release, Ice Dragon rips the earth. Enko ran like a bat out of hell as the water under feet surged upwards, shift and morphing. Soon, the blue liquid took on a shape almost identical to the pink crystal, a dragon. It was a little bit smaller, and looked a bit more streamlined, with a more serpentine head and lithe body structure. There were no horns on its head. Its color was ice blue instead of pink and white, and the eyes were a bright purple. Opening its mouth in roar, the beast charged towards the dragon, the pink and white one. Guren swore loudly as she was forced to abandon her dragon, charging chakra into her feet and jumping high into the air. The two dragons collided head-on, exploding into 1,000 pink, white and blue shards of mixed ice and crystal. The sharpened remains scattered across the battlefield, hitting the water as the three ninja leapt away from the hail of deadly projectiles. Not wanting to lose any momentum, Enko rushed forward, lashing out at Guren with a knife strike as soon as she was within range. It was dodged when the woman in question sidestepped and launched her own attack, a high kick aimed towards Enko's head. That attack might have hit had it not been for Haku, who descended from above and forced the leg back down by jumping on it. What followed after that was Haku and Enko double-teaming Guren, who found herself hard-pressed to do anything more than stay on the defense. While their teamwork was not perfect, the Jonin and Genin still managed to fight together effectively, making counterattacking either one of them very difficult. Guren ducked under a spin kick as Enko came in high. Her arms crossed themselves in front of her face as a foot from Haku came flying at her as soon as she crouched, almost as if the boy had predicted this was what she would do. There was a loud bang as sandaled foot met clothed arm and Guren was sent skidding across the water's surface, creating waves in her wake. Even gaining some distance from Haku did not give Guren reprieve. As soon as she stopped moving, she was forced to move again as Enko descended upon the water's surface where she had been with a loud crash, her foot extended in an axe kick. This was followed by several dozen icy spikes of death rushing up from the water's surface to impale her. Practically flying backwards as she tried to avoid the spikes, Guren found herself running headlong into Enko. She managed to dodge the first attack, a karate-style chop to her shoulder, but the kick to her left arm sent her body spinning. Even though she managed to regain balance relatively quickly, it was not fast enough for her to fully avoid the water needles that scratched against her torso. Before too long, Haku was once again engaging her in taijutsu. Ignoring her now bleeding side, Guren gave as good as she got, exchanging a flurry of power and fast blows. Each strike between the two of them caused a mild gust of wind to push against their faces, ruffling their hair. While Haku was keeping Guren busy with some close-range combat, Enko snuck up behind the woman and aimed a strike towards the back of her neck. A killing strike that would sever her spine. Guren dodged it, of course, but it was revealed to be a feint when half a dozen snakes shot from her sleeves and wrapped around her. Kami, damn it. Looks like we finally managed to trap you in our net, little crystal user, Enko smiled smugly. Now we just need to get you into port where I can do a proper interrogation. The snake mistress shuddered in bliss, her cheeks suddenly becoming very flushed. Oh, I just can't wait to hear the screams you make as I torture you, your sanity slowly eroding as you face unspeakable horrors and cough up every single secret that fucking prick has. It's going to be so delicious. Enko sensei, Haku's fearful voice broke her reverie. You're not a what? Haku's face turned beet red. He looked over at Guren and leaned and cupped a hand to his mouth. You're not a sadist, are you? Brat, I am the ultimate sadist. Haku backed away in fear. What makes you think I'm going to be giving you leaf idiots any information? Asked Guren. Enko raised a single, delicate eyebrow. I'm going to torture you until your sanity erodes and you spill every single one of Orochimaru's secrets. Were you not listening to me earlier? Oh no. I heard you, Guren gave a dark smile. I was just wondering what made you think I was going to let you interrogate me. Anko frowned. You say that like that you have a choice. Of course I have a choice, Guren smiled at the snake mistress before her entire body stiffened. Anko's eyes widened as patches of pink and white appeared on Guren's skin and clothing. Before long, barely even 3 seconds, the person in front of them became a solid block of pink and white crystal. A crystal clone. Anko grit her teeth. The snakes wrapped around the clone and shattered the crystal into a dozen pieces as they squeezed in an extension of Anko's anger. Damn it, damn it, damn it. I can't believe I let myself get fooled by that bitch so easily. I should have realized she'd substituted herself with a clone. It just goes to show you how skilled that woman was, Haku said calmly. Someone needed to be calm in this situation. That she could seamlessly replace herself with a crystal clone that she had made without either of us noticing is no small feat. That kind of skill is on the same level as Zabuza-sama and Kakashizan. She's definitely someone to watch out for. Ha. Anko sighed. I guess you're right. I suppose we should just be thankful that both of us were fighting her. Had we been fighting against her one-on-one, we would have lost. It rankled her to admit that, but Anko knew where her limits lie. As good as she was no Hatake Kakashi. What should we do now? Anko sighed as she looked around at their former battlefield. When Anko had been given this mission, she had not been anticipating that their two most powerful members would have to deal with a demon threat while she and Haku were forced into battle against one of her bastard of a former sensei's henchmen, and a powerful one at that. Now their skiff had been destroyed, it was no morning, and the nearest port was still a good dozen kilometers away. We walk from here to the nearest port town, what else? Anko hiked her thumb in the direction of Mother Island. If we stay here, we'll eventually run out of chakra and then have to swim our way to town. She scratched the back of her head and began walking. Come on, Icy, let's get going. Haku sighed as he began to obediently follow his sensei. Not like he had anything better to do. Why couldn't she have chosen a better nickname for him? He blamed Akane and Naruto for this. Somehow, he just knew it was their fault. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. Make sure to like, share and subscribe. This is Raven Sage signing off.